Good evening, everyone. This is the second debate of the cycle Building a Better Tomorrow. This evening, we'll talk about housing and specifically in housing in time of pandemic. And we will talk on this subject with Emily Clancy of Coalizione Civica per Bologna, City Councillor in the City Hall of Bologna, Lucía Martín, the Barcelona Comú, City Councillor for Housing and Renovation of the Municipal Government of Barcelona, Céline Papin, Europe Écologie Les Verts, Deputy Mayor and City Councillor for International Relations of the Municipal Government of Bordeaux, Elisabeth Clausen-Muradian, Chairwoman of the Green Councillors Group of the City Council of Hannover, responsible for housing policies, and Marta Nalin, City Councillor for Housing Policies of the Municipal Government of Padova. You can listen the translation of this debate, clicking on the bar below in the interpretation button. And potete attivare la traduzione cliccando sul bottone in basso con scritto interpretazione. Podéis activar la traducción haciendo clic en el botón en la barra de abajo. We will talk this night about the growing municipal global movement that has taken place in the city and how this new kind of citizenship that is moving inside the city is creating an important site of resistance. And this concept is based on tangible relationship between a real neighbor and neighborhood relationships, and it's fundamentally intertwined with the topic of housing. And so, like many other fundamental rights, the right of housing has been critically impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And in this moment, in this time of crisis, we must focus our energies and the resources on shaping and create a better normality for the, we hope, near post-pandemic future, and starting from the city as a social and a political arena. So we can discuss this with our panelists that I already presented, that represent a lot of cities of Europe, so Bologna, Padova, Hannover, Bordeaux, and obviously Barcelona, that with Coalizione Civica and is hosting and is organizing this cycle. And so we want to start to talk about the perspective and the pandemic, how impact in the right of housing, the right to housing in our cities. So Elisabeth, we will start with you, and you preside over the Green Councillor in the City Council of Hannover, that is governed by a Green Mayor. And which competencies have the cities in Germany on housing policies, and what has been done so far in Hannover to guarantee the right of housing?
Oh, thank you. At first, good evening at all. Yes, in Hannover, a socially just housing policy is one of our core municipal concerns. We are trying to implement this as much as possible within the framework of the existing political alliance. But the following must be said in advance. Germany is predominantly a tenant country. The majority of households are tenant in Hannover in particular. A total of 3/4 of the apartments are rental apartments and only a quarter are condominiums. Hannover is also a growing city. Around 33,000 inhabitants have been added in the last 10 years, and an increase of another 15,000 inhabitants is expected over the next 10 years. The growth is characterized in particular by the influx of people who come to us to study, to work, or as migrants and refugees. In the 1990s, there were vacancies in our housing market, and some cities even sold their own housing stock. This trend has been reversed for years, and it has become increasingly difficult for people to find adequate housing. Growing populations and the associated shortage of housing, the rise of construction costs and the rents, the land prices, and the increase in property prices pose major challenges for the housing industry and politics in Germany, and so in Hannover too. In order to counteract these effects of a tight housing market, our city council adopted in 2013 the so-called Housing Concept 2025. The aim of this concept is to increase the housing construction, to secure and create affordable housing, to develop the housing stock, and to intensify the dialogue with the local housing companies. Especially in recent years, this has also enabled recognizable successes to be achieved in the area of housing construction. Since 2013 until today, new building rights, that means ready to build areas, have been allocated for a total of about 10,000 apartments. In the meantime, however, one thing has become clear. The rental housing construction that arises in the new building offers mostly rents in the higher priced segment. It's also a consequence of the increased construction costs in recent years. The focus of our housing policy is therefore mainly on the creation and safeguarding of affordable housing. To this end, we decided in the city of Hannover, also in 2013, on a municipal housing subsidy program. With this program, the city grants housing companies attractive construction grants so that they can offer apartments at low rental prices. But there is a 10-year fixed rental price for the subsidized apartments. That means that rental prices must not be increased during this period. The volume of this housing subsidy program is around 63 million euros. As an additional obligation, we have decided in the city council that investors who want to build new housing on new building rights or on communal areas must create at least 30% subsidized housing for people with different incomes. At least 30% of these must be apartments with municipal occupancy rights. These are low-cost apartments where the city has the right to assign tenants.
Thank you, Elisabeth. And I remember that you can write your question in the chat if you have some, and we will move forward. And I will ask to Emily, that is city councillor in Bologna, and is acting from the opposition. But what Bologna has done to assess the right to housing and to avoid eviction, or to handle the problem that is linked with the pandemic. And
so first of all, thanks, because it's always very inspiring to hear what other municipal platforms are doing in their own city, and many times we've followed your example on housing especially, so I'm really honored to be on this panel with all of you. Actually, one of the main reasons why Coalizione Civica chose to run independently from a center-left coalition 5 years ago was actually the fact that we really didn't agree with how the Democratic Party had dealt with right to housing in the previous term. In fact, we fiercely opposed it. As in many other countries, in the last economic crisis, which hit Italy a few years later than maybe North America, there were many evictions by the Democratic Party, and a lot of housing experiences that we thought to be really interesting and innovative were just torn down without really much care for trying to protect those really interesting experiments of right to housing, and even people's organizations in protecting right to housing. So that was sort of how we started our term, being on the opposition and being quite far from the administration on this particular issue. Another problem was, I think we'll touch more on this in the rest of the event, was the fact that in the years following the crisis, in this particular term that we're serving on, the administration really tried to bring Bologna into a circuit of sort of short-term rentals and short-term tourism that was exploiting the city. And Bologna, that already was quite expensive for rent, in these 5 years has become the second or third, depends on the list, city for cost of living. So it has the same prices as Milan or Rome, which we found, of course, very preoccupying. So what we did was mainly for the first 2 years of our term try to highlight this, and then we put it into action. And as sometimes you have to do on the opposition, we didn't have the strength to get our own bills to pass. So we tried to organize people in our city to bring this issue to be really a strong issue in our city, and organized with a grassroots movement that we were part of called Pensare Urbano, which tried to and it succeeded. It collected 2,000 signatures, which is what you need to bring a particular topic to the attention of the council and to debate it. And we had, dozens of associations testifying to the fact that the cost of living in the city was now very hard for families and workers to sustain. And we needed to have a different solution, and we couldn't put Airbnb apartments before the right to people of actually living in their own city, or in the city that they had chosen to work in or to study in. After this, which is called Istruttoria Pubblica, this participatory event that we had, I think council's attitude towards the topic changed, even with the majority, even the Democratic Party. And so we were able to co-sign a very important bill on right to housing with other parties, both on the opposition and governing, that said, you know, we needed a lot more public housing. We needed to think of instruments to allow students to have rent at a particularly low rate if they chose to come here and study and rent a house. So not all of that, you know, change of direction is perfectly in plan now, but it's definitely, we have seen a change in the direction in these 5 years. And so I guess slowly what we tried to do was just change the mindset of council, thankfully working with a lot of organizations outside of council, because that's what you need to do sometimes to put pressure on the government. And now I think we are starting a new phase in public housing policies in our city.
Thank you, Emily. And now we will remain and we will still talk about Italian experiences, and this time from the point of view of the city government. And so, Marta, in Padova, what were the measures that was implemented on the right to housing?
Okay, thank you, Paolo. The municipality of Padua has 1,600 public houses. A regional law defines the rules for management of these public houses, as well as in all the Italian territory. But these houses are not sufficient, not enough to answer the demand for a house. So we have another 120 houses for housing emergencies, for people who don't have the requisites to access to public housing. We also have a big problem caused by years of prejudice and discriminatory narrative. The homeowners don't want to rent their homes to people of foreign origin. So we are trying to create a guarantee fund in order to persuade the owners to rent their houses. So we put some money to feed this fund, and we invest in a companion housing project in which there are social workers who help people take care of the house and pay the rent and related expenses. We have seen also that often the lack of a home is not the only fragility that people have. For this reason, we are building various projects for European and national calls around the themes of house and work, with a view to broader inclusion. For example, we have a project called Next to Me for the inclusion of families of people of foreign origin. These are some of our actions to guarantee the right of house. But I think that we need also in Italy, we need a general idea for all the cities, because for this problem, this kind of problem, like the house or the job, municipalities are alone, and we need a general idea, a general policy to create a structure, an important structure, to especially in this period.
Thank you, Marta. And so you talk about how the municipality are alone in some cases, and Lucía, you now are city councillor for housing policies in the government of Barcelona, but you also have had experience as deputy in the Spanish parliament. So you can tell us how has been done in Barcelona, and how the state can afford and can extend the policies to guarantee the housing, the right to housing.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this talk. I'm happy to be a part of this all-women panel talking about housing. This is not very usual, so I think it's something nice and to be proud of it. And please excuse me because I'm not used to speaking English very often, so let's see how it goes. And in order to explain what we are doing, I'll start saying that we arrived to the city government in 2015, and that was just a few years after this great financial crisis of 2008. That crisis here in Spain and mean hundreds of thousands of families that were evicted all over the country. This was a clear evidence of housing policies that never aimed to guarantee the right to housing. So they were at the service of the benefit of certain economic sectors, powerful sectors, of course. And just to have another data, in Spain, we have less than 2% of public rental housing. This is a disaster. So at that time, near 2015, social movements and organized citizens were the ones that lead the defense of the right to housing during that crisis. And in fact, an important part of Barcelona and Comú, which is our party, came from activism, starting with the mayoress. Ada Colau was an activist for the right to housing. And that's why once we are in the government, the demand and the challenge that we are facing is even bigger when we are talking about housing policies, because we are coming from there, no? And moreover, if we consider that in terms of housing policies, we all know that the highest budgets and the capacity to drive these structural changes that we were talking are mostly at regional or at state level. We know that when we are in the city council. Anyway, when we entered the city council, housing policies became one of our first priorities of the government, both in terms of budget and also in terms of new strategies. And I don't know, just to mention some of them as an example, we are building more public rental housing than ever in the city before. That means that by the end of 2023, we will not be far from doubling the public housing stock that we found in 2015. That was around just 7,000 units. That's what we found when we arrived. And another thing, we have created a special unit to prevent evictions that has served more than 10,000 families since 2015 that before this unit was created, they were alone. So these people, it's not alone, and we are stopping these evictions. We also create an anti-harassment unit to protect tenants from abuse. This was never created before. Now we are collaborating with housing cooperatives and social developers, giving them municipal plots of land to develop co-housing and social renting projects. And we are finishing, for example, the process to create a public-private company to build more than 4,000 affordable rentals in Barcelona and its metropolitan area. We also have approved a regulation that requires all new private constructions and private major renovations to include as a 30% of affordable housing units. That has been really a big battle for us because the private sector didn't want this regulation to be approved, but we could do it. But at the same time, as some of my colleagues was saying, many key housing policies depend on changes at regional and state level. This is what we need. So, for example, we still have a low investment in social housing, and as a consequence, today the regional level, the regional government, that means the Catalan government, is building only 35 public housing units in Barcelona. That's crazy. We are building 2,000 units and the regional government is building 35 public housing units. So this is a clear example that we need more implication from these state levels and regional levels. We have now just some temporary measures due to COVID situation to protect vulnerable people facing evictions. But we need them to be permanent, and this is also, again, a state regulation. we need, well, we have a rent regulation that has been approved at regional level, but it has been challenged in court by the right-wing party. So again, we need that at state level, the state government can approve a rent regulation to protect the Catalan rent regulation. And I could go on and on and on. And that's why one of our main tasks here in the City Council is also to work to achieve these regulatory changes that are not at the local level, but are at the Catalan level or at the Spanish level. I don't know if this helps to make a global vision on what we are doing and what we need to be done for others or by others.
Thank you, Lucía. And then Céline, you are deputy mayor in the city of Bordeaux, in the City Council of Bordeaux, and governed by a Green mayor. And what would you distinguish as the main policies related to the right of housing in Bordeaux?
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me. So first of all, maybe just to let you know our local situation. We just won the elections, the local elections last year, after 70 years of right-wing local government. And it was a list made of almost all left-wing parties, and with half of our candidates coming from civil society with no political commitment before. And housing was probably the main part of our political campaign, because Bordeaux has suffered a very important increase in our local housing market since 2015. And such as Bologna, Bordeaux has become one of the most expensive French cities after Paris and Lyon, plus 30% in 5 years, plus 60% in 10 years. So as you can see, we have a very big problem of access to housing, rental housing, but also, of course, owning a house. And we have the need also to build 2,500 new housing per year, because we are an attractive region, and also because of family splits. And we have around 16,000 social housing demands still waiting. So it is a main issue here in our city, and the problem is, as it was told before, that the main competencies are not at the municipal level in France. It's mostly at the metropolitan level or the state level. But despite all that, we of course have begun to work on this big issue for the last 9 months, and we mainly worked first of all by doing an audit of all our public properties, because we know that we have some vacant and some public properties that are quite that could be used in order to also propose housing for people in some economic and social difficulties. We have also decided to experiment rental regulation. It's a new possibility by the French law, and a few cities have decided to experiment it, Paris and Lille, and Bordeaux is now a new French city that has decided to experiment that in order to slow down a little bit the rental prices. We have also stopped all current transactions of public buildings just after coming to power. We have looking at any new building programs in order to try to readjust them in terms of social housing parts and also green areas included in the project. But of course, we have many things still to implement, because we are facing, as you told before, the consequences of the COVID-19 crisis that has increased quite a lot social and economic difficulties in our city. For example, for instance, we have plus 30% of of people coming to our municipal center asking for social aids. And of course, this kind of new actions need quite many financial and human means. So it's quite difficult also to implement all the program we wanted to implement in a crisis context. That's more or less, well, just to begin maybe the conversation, and then we can maybe talk later about other subjects. We have also a big problem with squats. We have many people living in very difficult situations. Almost 2,000 people living either in public or private buildings illegally, but also in just in areas that are of course not suitable for living. And we are trying to propose them solutions. But the problem is that it's a competence, a national competence. Normally, this right to get a suitable housing, and we are currently facing a conflict really with the state authorities here in Bordeaux, because they have quite how can we say that? They have quite a right-wing vision of course, of housing, and first of all, they don't consider people with no legal administrative situation, which is completely, I mean, they are existing anyway in our territory, so we cannot bear seeing them living in such conditions. And also, they are not respecting the COVID sanitary situation. I mean, we are supposed to offer quite good sanitary conditions, and actually for those people, the state doesn't respect this ambition. And we are currently trying to convince all the mayors from the metropolitan area to work together in this theme, in this aim. But it's not very easy because, well, most of the mayors are socialists, and they are considering that, well, it's not their competence, it's national one. And as we are the center, the city the city that is in the center of the metropolitan area, of course, most of those people living in squats, when they are evicted, of course, they come to the city center, obviously. And we have tried in the last weeks to find solutions for them, but we are, of course, achieving our limits now, because we cannot offer hundreds of flats, or at least shelters for those people alone. So we are trying to convince the other mayors to take their part in these solutions, because it's we truly believe it's, of course, a human right to everybody, not depending on its legal or illegal situation, to have a real shelter, and of course, obviously, a housing solution in order to then build his new life here in our city.
Thank you, Céline. You already introduced the second part of this debate, because we will move forward now to the current situation, the COVID-19 crisis, and how this crisis impact, especially on the tourist-based urban economy, that shows that this type of economy is not sustainable under all circumstances. So, Lucía, what we can learn from this with respect to housing and urban policies, and how can we take advantage of the current crisis to move forward, and more broadly, how should we rethink public housing and its policies?
Okay, I'll try to share some ideas, because the question is really big. It's obvious that this COVID crisis has made access to housing a key element when we talk about protecting people's health. And this means that the need to stop evictions of vulnerable people, the guarantee of affordable housing, demanding more responsibility from large landlords, or developing public rental housing. All these issues are now in the public debate. So people is talking about housing, and we need to take advantage of that. Of course, during this past year, people in worse situations, this means homeless people, but also those who lost their jobs, those who lived in small apartments, those who are sharing rooms, or those without rental contracts have had more problems, have needed rent subsidies. Also, people with regular rental contracts have needed help to pay their rent. But at the same time, well, while all these critical situations were happening in the city, many areas of the same city remain empty. So after years of touristic growth and speculative investments, now we have in the city high rental prices and certain zones that are basically used as accommodation for tourists that are limiting the number of available rental housing. In fact, since 2015, we have limited the number of licenses for new touristic apartments, and we had sanctioned thousands of illegal touristic units, but now we are going to have a new battle with the spare bedrooms because Airbnb is pressuring to legalize them instead of the whole apartments, but now they want the spare bedrooms to be the main touristic accommodation. This is going to be a battle with them. But again, considering that we have these empty apartments now in the city, in order to try to use them, we recently started a collaboration program with these tourist operators. And now we have 100 apartments that are accommodating near 300 people, mostly family with kids in vulnerable situations. But as I said, this is not enough. And in fact, we are seeing how these touristic apartments are entering the housing market, but they are short-term rentals. So it is clear that we need new regulations to force them to move these apartments to the residential market at affordable prices, not as short-term rentals. Another issue that is now on a table related to those empty buildings is that they are now also targets for those speculative investors that are looking for new opportunities. Since 2015, we have purchased 900 housing units to increase our city housing stock. But now we are asking for new state regulations at state level to make it easy that public administrations could buy these empty buildings instead of these investors, these global investors, in order to buy them, but at below market prices. That's what we are trying to negotiate with the state government. Another important issue are the evictions. After a lot of political pressure from the streets, from the people in the streets, and also from our city council, we have new rules at state level that are stopping the evictions of people in worse situations. This has been a big step, but now we need to make it permanent, and we need to go further, asking those large landlords to offer affordable rents to their tenants. So again, as at the beginning, when we talk about housing policies, we need new regulations that are not in the local level, because if we really want to promote these structural changes that protect the right to housing after decades of speculation, we need to increase the public housing stock. We need to involve the private developers in the construction of affordable housing. We need to regulate rental prices. We need to develop anti-speculative tax policies. And all of these big policies are depending on the state. So this is our fight now.
Thank you, Lucía. And Céline, in Bordeaux, what was the extent that and the effect of the setback of the tourism and how it influenced the housing policies that you run?
Well, we face a little bit like Barcelona, this problem of Airbnb development in the last years, but especially for students and young workers, because the main problem concerned small flats. And a regulation had already been decided in 2018 with 120 days annual limits, and also an interdiction for owners to change the official use of one's flat if they don't create a new housing elsewhere in the city. And in our program, we had plans to lower this limit until 90 years and also to reinforce public controls. Of course, with this COVID crisis, we have seen decreasing tourist arrivals, but at the same time, as students are now living back in their parents' house because of mainly university online classes, we are not in a big problematic situation right now. But of course, we know that in some weeks, when especially in the next university, well, the beginning of the next university year, it will begin again, this big problem for young people to have access to small flats. And also, of course, we have this increasing problem for workers to have the warranty of the necessary warranty to get access to this housing problem. So as I told you, we are planning to have a stricter regulation of this Airbnb. We have also developed a new tourist strategy, that is more focused on local tourism and not on this international and weekend tourism with this low cost flights. And so we hope that by those means to lower a little bit the number of flats concerned by this issue here in Bordeaux. And as Lucía told before, we are also trying to prevent in some parts of the city, in the very center, in the historical center, I can't find the word, some trials for promoters to buy some buildings, entire buildings, in order to make this. For example, we have a project that we are trying to prevent, a project of luxury youth hostel in the historical center. So we are trying to buy this building in order to prevent the prices to get higher in the sector.
Thank you, Céline. And Emily, in Bologna, the absence of tourism has lowered and has caused low economic activity, and this situation impact also on the economic structure, and how this situation influenced the housing in Bologna, and how do you expect the government to react in these new circumstances?
So based on what you others were saying, I think we agree that the silver lining, the small positive aspect of the pandemic, was that many of the issues that we had always been battling stopped being issues that maybe a minority of political parties had been dealing with, and went back to being absolutely central in public discourse. So this happened with, public accessible healthcare, welfare, better school facilities, and it happened once again with housing, just as you all were saying. So I think that was, the one positive side of the pandemic that allowed us to start pressuring again, even at a national level. And so many petitions that were signed sort of from the bottom up reached Parliament, and there was a stop on evictions that will continue to last till the 30th of June. So at least, the first thing that was said right away on the state side, because again, as municipalities, as city halls, we don't have that much power, was, okay, first of all, in this moment, right to housing is also a question of public health. So you can't throw people out of their homes at this particular time. So that was the first important issue and solution. The problem is, of course, it's not permanent, so we need to act on this. And it's very interesting what other cities are doing with the collaboration with tourist operators. Here we've started, the city government has started working with those who were renting on short-term rentals, even on Airbnb and those platforms that we had been struggling with, and trying to convince them to just go back to the normal rent market. Even imagining new solutions maybe for workers who are here only Monday to Friday, or students who come for, you know, some months or a year or a few years but aren't here long term. But I think that's just the beginning. I think we really need to imagine how to bring forth regulation, you know, at a whole nationwide level to force these apartments to come back into the housing market. That is really the #1 issue. And again, I'm not bringing a solution. That's the solution we need. And we haven't gotten to that point yet, unfortunately. But I do agree that that's the only way to go forth with this. And hopefully the pandemic has allowed for a bit more of knowledge on this particular fact in order to have the necessary pressure to get government to do this.
Thank you, Emily. And Marta, what have you learned in the government from the impact of the COVID-related economic changes on housing policies?
Okay. Yes, in Padova we have a different situation than in Barcelona or Bologna about the tourism. But I think we should pay attention and don't make the same mistakes. We should create a good dialogue with the private owner to sustain them and convince them to continue renting to families and not to transform their homes into touristic apartments. In Padua, there are a lot of students, and we need to protect them. So we have signed an agreement with student associations, tenant association, and owner association to ensure fair rental contracts. And I think that this is important also now when we are not a lot of students in Padua because of the pandemic situation, but for future we have to maintain this policy. The crisis caused by the health emergency impacts on the loss of job and home. There are 1 million more people poor in Italy. Until June, the government has established a ban of evictions, but the problem will be managing what happens next. We are in dialogue with the tenant association, and we intend to strengthen the existing project relating to the guarantee fund, the creation of an agency for housing, the support for housing, and the co-housing path. Since last year, we have provided 500,000 euros in contribution to help people in difficulty to pay the rent. And we have to invest in social housing to offer opportunity also for people in a gray area, people who aren't poor, but who have some problems to stay in the private housing market. So we are now writing 3 projects to increasing public housing stock for this category of people, because yes, we have a lot of new people that call social services because they need new things, and we maybe we are not prepared. We are not. We don't have the right instrument, but we need to build new instrument to answer for new questions. So yes, it's difficult, but we need to do something for this new answers, new asks.
Thank you, Marta. And Elisabeth, I want to ask you how the economic changes have impact and influence the housing policies in Hannover in a more broad way.
Yes, Hannover is not a classic tourist center, but above all a trade fair and congress city. However, the impact on the housing market in Hannover is very similar. Hotel capacity is either scarce or expensive. Tourists and guests therefore prefer to choose private accommodations. By renting out housing to tourists and business travelers, owners can earn much more money than renting out the apartments to locals at regular rental rates. That our problems in Hannover too. That means that this capacity will be withdrawn from the regular housing market in order to prevent this in the future. We want to adopt a so-called statute against misuse of the purpose of housing in Hannover. The city can therefore regulate that apartments are not used for office or hotel purposes, for example, Airbnb, and thus are removed from the housing market. The corona pandemic has stopped this process because at the moment no trade fairs and no congresses are allowed to take place. That means that many hotels are empty and there is currently little demand for private accommodations. However, we assume that with the recovery of the trade fair and congress business after the pandemic, this demand will again increase and the need for a municipal regulation will remain. Of course, the corona-related contact barriers result in loss of income for many households due to short-time working, unemployment, or limited business. If the households are tenants, their ability to rent is at risk. And if they live in their own condominium, they may have difficulty paying back loan installments. There are state emergency measures for this. These include, for instance, a temporary restriction of the right of termination if the rental or loan debt is due to the pandemic. And also a temporary waiver on asset audit in the granting of state social benefits to poor people, including housing benefit subsidies. Yes. However, these are measures that are not taken at the municipal level, but are taken by law within the competence of the federal government and apply throughout Germany.
Thank you, Elisabeth. And now I want to go forward and talk about the impact on the marginalized people in some intervened. You already touched this subject, and to the right of the housing of the homeless people also, and how to handle this problem also in the lockdown phases, where everyone tell to stay at home, but this problem for the people that doesn't have a home is obviously a big problem. And I want to ask to Emily, and I'm trying also to put inside some question that has come in the chat, and I want to ask you how the issue of marginalized people has been addressed, want to address, and how the housing force, and if you think the housing force could be a good alternative, a valid alternative to include and to avoid this problem, and also if you have some data about the age group that is most affected of the housing shortage. That is a question that has come from the chat.
Okay, so first of all, I forgot earlier, but Marta's words reminded me, so I'll just say Bologna is also giving contributions towards rent in this period. So about 4,800 families received contributions up to 1,500 euro to cover their rent. But of course, it's still not enough. So that's why I was thinking more broadly about how we need state legislation and more public housing and more contributions towards rent. But going to this last question, Paolo, I think once again, this is another case where the pandemic has shifted the majority of people's perception on right to housing. And in the case of people who don't have access to a home, what administrations usually do, or what we had seen definitely in Bologna up to this point, was usually you would try and put all the people that didn't have access to a home in these big buildings all together, sometimes separate from the rest of the, from the center of the city, not really allowing them to integrate in the life of the city, kind of marginalizing them even more, though they were already marginalized by their social and economic condition. And I think we really have to change that direction, and housing first. So trying to work with people who don't have a house and giving them a house first, and then allowing them to, look for a job, work with social services, deal with, their health issues or mental issues, anything that might be wrong with them, is the way to go. And we have to think as administrations, we're on the opposition, but, if we ever have the chance to govern Bologna, we really have to think about how to facilitate the access of people who don't have housing into smaller apartments, enable them right away to have a house, because it was said before, right to housing is a universal right. And it also gives you the dignity of being able to enjoy all your other rights. If you don't have a house, it's really hard to enjoy any other type of right that you have. So instead of, making people feel all the weight of their condition, of their, fragility and economic difficulty by just putting them in a group house, in a block of apartments, not apartments, but big rooms with lots of beds, and trying to instead insert them into smaller apartments that are part of communities, and making them work with the social services in the communities and just experience the community, I think would also be much better for the actual person to, get their dignity back, start working again with a positive attitude towards, finding all they need to become economically independent. I think, that's what we really need in the shift of perception of how to deal with this issue. And housing first is, I think, a solution in that sense, for sure.
Thank you, Emily. And now I would like to know if in Padova has been done something similar, and how you think that the city can face the homeless and the marginalized people issue.
Yes, as you said, the health emergency has entered in our society as a contrast liquid and has brought out the things that don't work in our society. Last year, when they told us that we had to stay at home, we immediately thought about people who doesn't have a home. The municipality of Padova coordinates an inclusion table with the local realities that deal with homeless people. We have expanded the night reception services, increasing the number of beds and opening them also during the day. With the help of this local association. And it was an important experience in which also Caritas and occupied social centers collaborated, and it was a very strange but precious experience. Today, we have 82 beds in public dormitory, 24 in winter structures that we still keep open, and other places in other private structures for a total of 189 beds. There is also a housing-led project for 26 people who live together in a small apartment. And the intention is to increase this project. I agree with Emily. I think we must work to transform the reception facilities into housing land and housing first projects, because they are projects that put the person at the center and allow us to build a more effective autonomy project together with each person who can live near other people and within the community. So I think that this is the right way. And I don't know, I know the experience of Lisbona, and I think that it's an important experience. I know that they don't have big structures, but they have also a lot of apartment in the city, and I think it's the right way for people and to create more inclusion, and the right may be the only way to help these people to have to return independent and to have a life and a dignity life. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. And Elisabeth, in Hannover, how does the city respond to the issue that and the problem of that with the homeless and marginalized people?
In Hannover, we have numerous facilities for homeless and homeless assistance, as well as addiction assistance, homeless shelters, emergency sleeping places, day meetings. These are places to stay and rest, and care and counseling centers, and street ambulances. It's precisely these institutions and the people for whom they are contact points that have been hit particularly hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to the hygiene and distance rules, these facilities can look after many fewer people. In addition, the risk of contagion and shelter where more people usually come together is particularly high. That's why in the cold winter months, the city has taken short-term action by renting rooms in the youth hostel and hotel rooms, in addition to the existing accommodations and housing the homeless there. Even in quarantine cases, homeless people are currently housed in this way. In addition, the city has developed and accelerated a model due to the pandemic situation, sorry, which accommodates homeless people for a period of up to 3 months in an apartment with their separate living area, and during this time intensively personally supervises them and supports them in developing a follow-up perspective together with social educational specialists. The city of Hannover is planning costs for more than 2 million euros for this purpose. The model is called Plan B, OK, and the OK stands for orientation and clarification. The aim is to be able to get people back into regular housing. At this point, I would also like to return to the subsidized housing in Hannover. The city of Hannover currently has almost 20,000 apartments with occupancy rights that are available for people with low or also no incomes. With the help of these occupancy rights, the city also manages to place marginalized people back into regular housing. We have also a municipal housing company, and this company is also an important guarantor for securing affordable housing. It's the largest housing company in our city with more than 14,000 apartments on its own portfolio. Of course, the city has many occupancy rights there. Our municipal housing company is also committed to socially vulnerable tenants with great social responsibility with social responsibility. In cooperation with the social housing assistance, it has just completed a Housing First project that provides regular housing with social support for the homeless. I would also like to mention that our municipal housing company has built numerous refugee shelters with a good standard of housing on behalf of the city. These are operated by various social institutions carefully selected by the city and with which it concludes appropriate care contracts. Currently, around 4,200 refugees with more than 60 different nationalities live in the decentralized accommodations in the city area of Hannover. We have more than 30. many accommodations are built in such a way that they can also be used as apartments in the regular housing market in the future. This month we will adopt our new municipal budget for the next 2 years. With our political alliance, we have an alliance with the Social Democrats and the Liberals in Hanover. Also, with this alliance, we also provide our municipal housing company with more financial resources, so that it can become even more involved in social housing and build new housing for people who can't find housing on the free housing market, such as poor people, the homeless, migrants and refugees, but also medium-sized households that find themselves in a precarious position by the COVID-19 pandemic or other incidents. Of course, we also have a deficit budget in Hanover due to the corona pandemic. However, we believe that we must not make savings in areas that are fundamental to social cohesion. This includes the right to housing and affordable housing.
Thank you, Elisabeth. And Céline, what kind of policies do you implement in Bordeaux for homeless people, and how do you prevent marginalized people from ending up on the street during and after this pandemic?
Well, like other panelists, we are completely convinced that housing first is, of course, a valid policy in order to enable those people to recover dignity and access to education, employment, health. So we distinguish housing from offering a temporary shelter, and we aim at offering housing instead of just a temporary shelter. But in France, emergency housing is a governmental competence, and the city intervenes just as a complement, but cannot substitute to the state. But as I told before, the national policy doesn't really look after this issue despite its responsibilities. Normally, they should offer a shelter to anybody who would phone or call the number, the national number, but actually they don't even answer to most of them. So our local government has decided several emergency measures. As I told before, we've given all the houses and flats in a good conditions in our public patrimony to our social municipal center to welcome families. We also mobilized our municipal spaces to welcome and accompany homeless people, especially young people with dogs and with drug addictions in some cases, because they are often refused, or they just don't want to go to the classical homeless shelters because they refuse, for example, dogs when those people really need to be with their animals. So we offer some alternatives to this kind of public. And we are also trying to implement a new policy as for another public, because when we talk about homeless people, actually there are many different publics, and all of them are in different administrative situations and in different, they have different solutions that are offered for them. Sometimes not even a solution is offered by the state, but so we are trying to focus on those people who are not getting an offer from the state. For example, people with no legal papers, and also we are focusing on the Roma community, who is particularly particularly in a really difficult situation in our territory, because they are refused in most of housing traditional circuits. So we are trying to implement a new policy that consists in creating temporary housing sites where they could rest for a few months, and with a social workers helping them to build an integration project and helping them to find a job and also to ask for social housing. This way, it worked quite well in other French cities, in Nantes and in Strasbourg, that tried this kind of policy. And after a few months, most of those people were just integrating the classical social housing system. So we are trying to make all the mayors from the metropolitan area to welcome those temporary inclusion spaces in order to have a real strong policy, and not only a short-term policy, because all the time it's the same situation. I mean, there is an expulsion, and those people are going to another city, and again the social work must begin again with problems of course education for the children, for example. So that's our main concern, to try to get out of a short-term vision in order to find solutions that could be temporary, but at least for a few months, and with a real social work, and at least always the vision that it has to integrate then the classical system.
Thank you, Céline. And Lucía, what kind of housing policies have you implemented for marginalized and homeless people in Barcelona, and how do you think should we address this topic after the pandemic?
Yeah, I think I mean, I will say some issues that had been mentioned before. Of course, during the worst moments of the pandemic, we were able to accommodate all homeless people in hostels, in shelters, and other public facilities. But the lack of regional policies on that issue was a huge problem. That in fact, what happened was that other local governments with less local resources sent many people from all over Catalonia for us to attend them in Barcelona. So that was a crazy thing. Of course, it has been mentioned that these hostels and shelters were temporary and were only extraordinary measures. And what we require, of course, are a long-term solution. Here in the city, we have developed a model of different temporary accommodations for people that are on the waiting list for a permanent housing solution. Those accommodations allow for an independent life while providing access to social services on site. And this model, so these accommodations includes emergency housing buildings, mixed buildings that include emergency and long-term housing. And we also have the prop housing units. I don't know if you know them, but these are these faster, industrialized and high quality housing units that are built from reused shipping containers that maybe you have heard of them. Of course, the housing first model is our ambition, and we have some housing units in it, but we need more resources to develop it at the scale that it's needed. And as I was saying, a regional and a metropolitan approach is needed, but because only with local resources, it's not enough. But I think it's important to highlight that housing problems are affecting large parts of our citizenship. In our metropolitan area, 40% of renters spend more than 40% of their income on rent. So public intervention in housing policies could not be limited to those in worse situations. We need a global and a multi-level strategy. And I think that it's good news that this concept has been included in the last European Union housing report, which has been recently adopted by a large majority in the European Parliament. And we need to use this European report to back up our demands, to back up our claims. For example, the Next Generation funds from the European Union must be used to rebuild our cities. But we know these funds are focused now on renovation and environmental sustainability. And also we need to add housing rights to this political agenda too. So we need, we know that renovation subsidies can trigger gentrification and can increase housing prices. So that's why we need rent regulation and anti-eviction rules in our cities. And we also know that in some of our countries, public investment in social housing is essential to provide affordable housing, but also to help the economy. So that's why we think that an alliance of European progressive cities is more important than ever to include those demands, those housing rights in the European agenda too.
Thank you, Lucia. We received a lot of questions from the listener, and well, I will do only some of them because we have a lack of time. So there is one question for Elisabeth about the private company that offered flats and how the government manage and control these flats, and why the company, what's the interest of the company to do that? So how the government convinced to offer these flats?
No, it's not a private company, it's a municipal company.
Okay.
The owner is the city, and the company has not 40,000, it has 14,000 apartments. And the inexpensive apartments are financed through the municipal housing subsidy program.
Okay, thank you. And there are other questions that everyone can ask and can respond. And so, for example, how to integrate the demand for more housing with environmental safeguards, because in order to not create new houses, but how to handle that. And for example, and another question that is quite interesting, how to manage apartment rent with municipal entity, 100% municipal entity, or also with public-private companies, and what's the best and what's the way that you choose, or you had to choose, you had to follow in your city. No? I don't know if someone want to, Céline, yes?
Yes, maybe for the first question, which is a really good question, because I think we all have very high ambitions as for environmental objectives. For example, in our program, we have a zero artificialization aim. So of course, when we want to build many new housing programs, it means that we have to focus on some districts, some parts of the cities that are already actually built. So a big part of our program is about renovating the current buildings, the vacant buildings. So I think what's very important is to have a very strong knowledge of our patrimony, of the municipality land, in order to use every empty space between buildings, between streets and public spaces, in order to propose also sometimes small units, not only big programs. And also it helps promoting social diversity in the city, because the former political team used to plan social housing in always the same parts of the city. Of course, in the parts where there was free land, free big land, but the problem is that it created some well, some district made only of social housing, which is not also a good solution, because it's important to have this social diversity in every part of the city. So I think it's true that it's very important to have always those two ambitions, to try to protect our natural areas, to have environmental ambitions, and at the same time to, of course, to promote some social housing for everybody.
Thank you, Céline. If someone else want to, Lucía?
About the public-private, yeah, maybe I can share some thoughts about this. In Barcelona, we have a very clear idea that the leadership in the creation of the housing stock, it has to be public, because we don't have a public housing stock. As I said before, we have in 2015, when we arrived, we had around 6,000 to 7,000 housing units, which is a crazy amount in a city with almost 1 million housing units. It's nothing. So there has to be a public leadership, but also we know, because we are seeing those cities that have I don't know, years and years and years of housing policies on their backs, and we know that we need to work with diverse actors. We need to work with privates that are non-profit privates, for example, like the housing associations. We are collaborating with social developers. We are collaborating with cooperatives. There are a lot of different privates with non-profit privates that are collaborating with us, and we need them to build and to manage this housing stock. And also we are starting, or we are developing some projects with classic privates, but for us the key is to change the rules. These decades before, the governments were giving them the land and telling the privates, okay, you can do whatever you want. And now we are changing the rules, we are keeping the land, and we are asking for the privates to come and collaborate with us, but just to do affordable rental housing. We are not building, we are not creating housings in order to sell them, but to keep them as a rental housing stock at affordable prices. So I think these are two concepts, no? Public leadership and collaborations with different types of privates, a lot of non-profit privates, but also when you try to work with classic privates, you need to put them new and different rules from the past. I don't know if I have been clear enough to translate the idea.
Thank you, Lucía. And unfortunately, we cannot answer all the questions because we reached our time limit. And but the fact that many people ask show that on this subject there is a lot of interest, and we should continue with this kind of debate. And I thank you, everyone: Lucía, Elisabeth, Marta, Emily, Céline, and everyone that allow to have this debate. Barcelona and Comú, the Coalizione Civica Bologna, Coalizione Civica Padova, Green Party of Hannover, Bordeaux, and all the people that is behind this live, and allow
our translator,
the translator, of course, and all the people that support us with the technical thing that was necessary to reach the people of five cities. And so let's hope to see we again, and I thank you another time, and see you again.
And thank you, Paolo.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Grazie mille.
Thank
Grazie
you.
mille.
Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.